Hello. Welcome to Understanding Lessons from CSG. It's the fourth of our Power Hour virtual forum series. Thank you so much for joining us. We all know that the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan has identified that 95% of the clean energy infrastructure is going to be built in regional Queensland. We also know that feedback from communities is telling us that we need to do engagement better. We need to partner with regional communities to ensure shared benefits, but also to build the collective social licence of the sector. At Engaged Outcomes, we've been engaging and talking with people right across regional Queensland so that we can understand their perspectives and their experiences with engaging with the energy transition for the development of our Regional Connect training program. And it's a bit of a scoop, a bit of a sneak peek for you guys. We're going to be moving to piloting our training with Queensland Renewable Energy Council in the next few months. So that's pretty exciting. Now, during our conversations, one of the things that consistently comes up is it is like CSG all over again. We have not learnt. It's like the old Wild West. So if you're wondering what that really means, if you're wondering what are the lessons that we should have learned from the coal seam gas boom in the Surat Basin, then you're in the right place. I'm Wendy Agar from Engaged Outcomes, and I'm delighted to have you here for our Power Hour. It's going to be 60 minutes of awesomeness. We've got fantastic regional experts here, from our keynote speaker, Andrew Breyer, through to our expert panel with Rob Fraser, Kathy Witt, and Fraser Power. And we all hope that you leave today with some fresh insights and understanding, and hopefully some practical tips and tricks for your engagement toolkit. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and acknowledge that you are coming from lands all over Australia. We're on the land of people who understand the concept of community, communication, and collaboration. So I'd like to pay my respects to them, their culture, and their elders, past and present. I also need to give a really big shout out to my supporters for this series, for this virtual forum series: Queensland Renewable Energy Council, Coexistence Queensland, Powerlink, and the Energy Charter. I have to thank them for sharing my vision of giving forward and giving people access to free, best practice, world-class experts. We're really passionate about building capacity and empowering people so that they can engage respectfully and effectively with regional communities. And this is just one small piece towards supporting that. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we go on. I do need to let you know that we are recording this session. So for some people, that means you might want to keep your camera off. And then in the next breath, I'm going to say, please keep your camera on because it's awesome to see your faces, but please stay on mute. We absolutely want this to be interactive and want your questions. The best way to do it when there's a lot of people on, like there is on this call, is to use the chat box though. Now we are using Zoom, and I know lots of you are not used to that. So a quick cook's tour of Zoom is, if you look down the bottom, whoops, sorry, my camera's the opposite, I think. Down the bottom there's the toolbar, and I want you all to have a look and see if you can find your chat toolbar. And in the chat, once you get the chat open, it sits along the side here. Chat's fourth over for me. It might be third over for you. So once you open it up, you can put a comment in there. So I would love you to put a comment about how you're going, where you're calling in from, how excited you are to see this incredible group of people. I told them the reason that we've had nearly 150 registrations is because of their cumulative impact of their awesomeness. So they will love to see where you're calling in from. And also, once we start to have people speak, it's in that chat box that you need to put your questions. Hello, Rosin. I'm pleased one person has put their little comment in there. And Michaela from Sydney, hello to you too. So there's also smiley faces and hands up. The reactions are down the bottom as well, but the best way truly is to use the chat box so that we can see your questions coming in. So let's get started. I know my speakers cannot wait to jump on and share their cumulative impact. So our keynote today is the most perfect keynote. His name's Andrew Breyer, and he's a man who wears many, many hats. And at the moment, one of them is as strategic advisor for Queensland Hydro. And as I said, he really is the perfect keynote. He has extensive experience in the CSG and resources sector. When I did a bit of research, he was the director of the CSG compliance unit with the Queensland government. He was the inaugural CEO of the Gasfields Commission, through to executive roles in the CSG industry during the boom. I know that Andrew's lived his whole life in rural and regional Queensland, and he has an engineering background, so he's worked and engaged with people in agriculture, government, and resources over the 5 years of his very young career. There might be numbers in front of that 5, but I'm not disclosing Andrew. And I've also witnessed firsthand the deep connections and lasting relationships that he has over many different communities. And I think it speaks volumes for Andrew's ability to build trust, and trust is built through character and competence. So he's a good bloke who knows his stuff. And I'm handing over to you now, Andrew. No pressure. Everyone, Andrew Breyer.
Yeah, good day, everyone. Look, it's those sorts of intros where I hate doing these sorts of things. So all I can promise is disappointment from this part forward, but thank you, Wendy, for the nice introduction. I'm going to figure out how to share a screen here first and make sure I've got the right one. And I think I might have it. Sarah, I'm looking for you to give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Got it. Excellent. Righto. So effectively today, as Wendy said, we're asked to discuss around the lessons learned from CSG. So the why me bit, Wendy's covered a fair bit of. So I think I've played most sides of CSG in Queensland, probably from about 2008 onwards. Originally, I was a regional manager for government out at Roma. Happened to be an engineer with groundwater experience who they figured out could dribble a little bit when he had to, and CSG came along and it sort of fell in my lap at the time. So I was regional manager for coal seam gas for a start, and then when they created the LNG enforcement unit, which later became the coal seam gas compliance unit, I was the initial director of that. I think then the floods happened in 2011 and I ended up running as general manager coal and coal seam gas for the Queensland government. And had a fair bit to do with it sort of in the heady days of coal seam gas through 2011, 2012. CEO of the Gasfields Commission, and then I ended up in private industry. So I've worked for Santos, I've worked for Origin, I've worked for Westside, all coal seam gas companies. I've done some contracting and consulting into Arrow and QGC and a few others as well. And then, yeah, to mix it all up a little bit, I've also owned, well, we had a bit of land out Roma Way there, which actually had a gas pipeline and a well on it as well. So I do think I've played most sides of it. I don't pretend to be an expert in anything. Despite Wendy's kind words, I'm sort of more of a generalist, I guess, who's played across a reasonable amount of this from both a technical and communities perspective. But today, really, I wanted to sort of go over some of the key findings or lessons from CSG from my perspective, but with a very much an engagement and communities hat on. So not getting into the whole policy frameworks and technical debates, but how did it actually play out in terms of engagement by and with the companies and what that actually meant for communities as a whole. So to get into it, and I've got to see if I can make sure I can go forwards here. Oh, there we go. Now, look, I'm going to explain the picture, but if I have to explain the picture to you, then we can't be friends anymore. I'm sorry, because this is a picture from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, which is probably one of the all-time best spaghetti westerns that existed. And I'm going to use it as a bit of a theme today, but we'll play it along as we go. I think the key thing here was that coal seam gas really represented, it came out of the blue for a lot of people around 2010. Now, it had been percolating along for a while before that, but I think in terms of scope and scale, people didn't realise what was coming. It came hard and it came fast from most people's perspectives. Since that time, you can see the statistics on the screen. Like there's been a lot of development in that part of the world. And 1,600 sort of plus petajoules of gas, that's roughly equivalent to powering 30 million homes. Or if you're like me and a bit of an old dairy farmer, it's roughly the amount of gas that about 400 million cattle put out on a daily basis. So it's a fair bit of gas. I think the thing with CSG, so it was 3 major companies with 3 major projects each. So you had 9 very, very large construction projects happening at the same time and focused primarily on one region of Queensland, which was the Surat Basin. There are some works in the Bowen, but the Surat was where the bulk of it was happening. And I think the key thing that we saw is that initially, and this may sound familiar, but initially, people were quite welcoming of coal seam gas. It was seen as something that would be beneficial for landholders in the region. They liked the idea of additional water that might come up. Those attitudes quickly changed and it went south to what I would say, to be honest, a fairly bad place in terms of both community acceptance and understanding and probably industry engagement as well. And then gradually that went to sort of weary acceptance to what I would now describe on the whole as a goodish sort of relationship with communities in the region. There's always hotspots and there's individuals, but on the whole, we're not seeing anywhere near the heat or the issues that we used to see sort of back in 2011, 2012, 2014. And look, our panelists today, all of them have lived this in different ways, and they'll go into more detail as we go on later on. So the way I wanted to tackle it, the good, the bad, the ugly. So the good, and that's Clint Eastwood, of course, because it can't be anything else. I think what worked well, and I know I'm going to focus on the engagement in communities, but what we have seen in these regions is an increase in regional prosperity. Not without cost and not without impact, but definitely an increase. I think one of the most common things that I've heard over time and seen myself is the reversal of the skills and people drain from regional Queensland. Like it's one of the first major industries which we've seen in rural and regional Queensland, which had a large technical skill component. So instead of going to university and going to work somewhere else, people came back, and we did see that. There was a financial independence and a diversity, I suppose, of income, both for landholders, regional councils like Western Downs will tell you stories about how they become debt-free as a result of coal seam gas, but also for service industries and skills that were developed locally. From a communities and engagement perspective, I think one of the things that was a standout for me was the use of scientific evidence. So when the debate started to change was when we really, really leaned in, and when I say we, I mean the royal we, but we really leaned into the science. So we had OGIA, the Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment, really look at groundwater models, predictions, what would occur, what wouldn't occur. There were numerous studies by Queensland Health into various concerns and health impacts. There was the formation of the Gas Industry Social Environmental Research Alliance, JISERA, with CSIRO. But we had some evidence to use and to actually engage with. And eventually, I've got that in brackets there, government did come to the party and start to engage as well as the companies. And that mixture of engagement by the companies and government and with backing of science and evidence was, I think, one of the key things which turned the tide in relation to CSG and got things going. I think the other one there that was key, and this will come up in the bad and the ugly later, was a significant change in attitude of the companies. So for a start, I think the CSG companies, and I use the term broadly, what we're looking at, right, we have a legal right to develop these projects. We have tenure over an area and we will go in and we will do so. Yes, there was social benefit spend and engagement and negotiation with landholders, but fundamentally it was a project that they felt were going ahead. It took a while to learn that you couldn't force the issue. Like even though you have a legal right, it's necessary to actually people need to want you there, or at least accept the fact that you are there. And when that happened, that did work really well, that change in attitude from companies. And I think all of those things led to certainty. And you'll hear that as a common theme from me today. Like human beings as a species, we're a funny lot. We've got all sorts of peccadillos and we react in all sorts of different ways. But the great majority of people, when you look at the research on it, the one thing that they deal with least well or most poorly is uncertainty. Uncertainty in terms of what it means for them, uncertainty in terms of what it means for the region, uncertainty in terms of what it means in terms of planning overall, what the impacts will be, what the benefits will be. It was an unknown. And the more certain things became, then the less heat there was. And it was really key to debate. In terms of what didn't, there was a very inconsistent approach to benefit in the early stages. So if you were a landholder who was hosting infrastructure, there was compensation and quite generous compensation in most cases. There was social investment and social spend, but it wasn't felt universally across a region or a community. There were haves and there were have-nots, and that created divides. Again, you'll always have haves and have-nots, but it was very, very evident in the early days of coal seam gas. And it was something that was always an issue and needed management. The other thing that didn't work well is the industry was bang and it was there. It was out of the gates early, and the regulation frame or the regulatory framework and the policy around it was built on the run. But we didn't have a regulatory framework that was actually designed to manage the large-scale development, which you would see in coal seam gas, which primarily occurs on land that the developer does not own. Like, we haven't seen that before. Like, the competing land use element of it, where you're actually operating over a large geographical scope on land that's being used for something else by someone else who owns it, is actually highly unusual, and coal seam gas was probably a first for rural and regional Queensland on that sort of scale. We didn't have the regulatory framework in place around it. I think the cumulative impacts were well and truly underestimated, and we never ever managed the competing land use early in the early days. Yes, we talked about coexistence, and we want both ag and coal seam gas and resources, but what did that actually mean, and how was that to be done? I think there was an information vacuum early on in terms of what didn't work. And this was to the detriment of both communities and industry, because what it did allow were some of the more ideological amongst us and the more activist element to fill that vacuum. And the thing is, when there's no information out there on something, and the only information you can get is from a single source, and they're willing to sprout it from the rooftops, then that's what you'll start to hear, and that's what you'll start to believe, because you have nothing to corroborate it against or compare and contrast. There was definitely a fear from both government and the key companies in the early days to engage. And when I say engage, I mean engage with the media, engage publicly, go on the record and say, no, that's not true. This is what we're going to do. There was very much a mentality of like small target. Let's keep ourselves as small a target as possible. We don't actually want to put ourselves out there, stick our neck out or lead with the chin, because we might actually get hurt. And it took a while to realise that you got hurt more badly by leaving that vacuum there and allowing others to fill that information void. And that was a key. And that's at all levels. Like, that was from management levels and with media, but right down to the practitioners on the ground. And you have very different skill levels on the ground, of course, as you always do in any role. But those that didn't actually want to engage and wanted to stay small were the ones that got hit the most. The other thing I think was there was a lot of engagement in the early days was information provision rather than engagement. So it very much was providing information on what happened or what would happen and trying to increase that certainty. But it wasn't engagement. It wasn't listening. It wasn't clearly defining what you could and couldn't vary. It wasn't making it well understood that there were no options in some instances, but we could in these. It wasn't being empathetic, I suppose, in terms of understanding the concerns from the landholder or the community's point of view, and then acting on those where possible or providing clarity where you can't. Like, you're never going to make everyone happy. And you can't appease everyone or provide everyone. But if they're unhappy, it's important that they understand why you can't make them happy in that instance. And again, it leads that information, or it's related to the information vacuum. But it was a real problem in the early days of CSG, and probably even mid sort of 2012 to 14 on up until about that point, I think. And you'll still see it occasionally now. I think the other one was just that the value and benefit wasn't seen by people. They didn't realise what it was going to be. It was the fear of the unknown. The heat definitely went out of it, as I said, when we got more science and engagement, but it also went out when people started seeing a benefit that you could actually, get a decent diverse income out of coal seam gas, that there were ways in which it could operate both on your property and in conjunction with your existing land uses. But that wasn't understood early, and it actually had to happen on the ground before people could explain it properly. Because again, I think industry was learning on the run as well. Like you would have all heard stories in the early days where people used to lob up at a landholder's place with a map with a whole series of dots on it, and that's where the wells are going to go. And, the landholder would look at it and go, well, that's interesting because that one's on top of my shed and this one's in a dam, or this one's 200 yards, in a floodplain. And it just got people's backs up the wrong way. Like you came in with something to go, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to provide you the information on how we're going to develop, rather than having the conversation around, well, look, we actually do need to develop. We need to understand what you're doing on your land and how we can work with that. And that took some time, but it didn't work well for quite a serious period of time in the early days. Now, I am running through this a bit because I do want to leave time for questions, because I think that's probably where the bulk of the value is. But in terms of what really, really didn't work, so the ugly stuff, and I know there's people who listened to me in renewables when I was over at QREC doing some work there, and others, and I've harped on this a lot. But people adopted a company or a project approach rather than understanding they were going to be judged as an industry. Yes, there were only 3 major players in that area, but the effects of or impacts of the actions of one player would affect the entire industry in that space. And with the advent of social media, and it was really kicking off in these days, and the activist side of it had figured out how to use it well, bad information or poor information would go very, very quickly. And it took a while for industry and government and others to realise that they actually had to be connected, coordinated, and support each other in that space in order just to get the facts across. So I'm not pretending everything was wonderful and they were wrong, but just to get the facts across, because there was a real information vacuum in that space. There was a focus on the individual instead of rather shared or sustained benefit. And I guess what I mean by that, and look, rightly so in a lot of instances, the focus was on the landholder's place on which the development was going to occur. And there's a whole list of legal compensatable impacts and so on that sit around coal seam gas development in that regard. But it was the impacts on others that took a while to realise people were important. So transport, roads, dust, noise, the number of people in town, what it actually meant for council infrastructure and services, what it actually meant for service industries, the cafes, etc. Those things weren't well understood nor communicated early. And we often had motel owners, local business owners, etc., bringing up or standing up in forums going, look, if you could just let us know what it is that the companies are planning to do over what period of time, like we can plan for that. We can service that. We can't react all the time in this space. Now, there's always a bit of give and take there. You can't do both all the time, but there were better ways to actually inform a community as a whole as to what was likely to happen and when it was likely to happen. And even ways that we still sort of never adopted or should have adopted, just simple things. Combined community notice boards where you could actually put stuff up around key activities, more in the way of local supplier engagement, etc. early. And Fraser will have some great stories around this because Origin's one of the companies that put a lot of effort into that in the later stages and actually kicked it along. And Western Downs Regional Council played a massive role in assisting with local benefit, local companies, and things like the Toowoomba and Surat Basin enterprises as well played a role. So getting all of those organisations involved, but providing them with the information and getting them up to speed was really important, and it just wasn't done early. We had a boom and bust scenario. So, it was going gangbusters, and then all of a sudden the oil price drops. Most of the construction was getting near the end, and it went really quiet really, really quickly. And so similar to the gear up where it happened overnight and people weren't prepared, they also weren't prepared for it to wind down. And there had been significant overinvestment in, let's say, infrastructure, accommodation, housing, if you like, that was made permanent for something that was never going to be permanent in terms of its ongoing intensity and use. So understanding, I think, here is understanding what I'm getting at is the understanding the difference between constructions and operations and what that actually does mean, and planning how that will actually roll out. So there's no point putting permanent infrastructure in for something that is non-permanent. You put in permanent infrastructure for what you know will be permanent and ongoing, and then you go temporary with the rest. I remember lots of conversations around camps. Now, camps in the early days were almost a tar and feathering offence. People did not like camps where you had all the people out of town in a camp. And look, and I get why. But the honest answer is that you also don't want to put them all in town, because the town cannot sustain that. And if you do set it up to sustain that, then it's got to sustain something which is not ongoing. So getting that right mix of camps versus local accommodation was something that just didn't happen. And that required more engagement at a local government level, at a community level, and at a company level to make sure that happened. And I think just the final point in the what really didn't was that the importance of community and of that regional engagement, involvement, planning, strategy, if you like, was slow to be realised. And if we have one learning I would love to take forward into renewables, it's that. Don't make those same mistakes. So I guess as a summary slide, and before we get into some questions, is where does this leave us with renewables? And look, this one obviously is not a Western. This photo up there of the village people is really a nod to Katie Mulder at QREC. I'm not sure if she's on the line, but since renewables started, every time I've heard Katie get up and speak, she goes, it takes a village, and it'll take a village for renewables to be right. And look, while I pay her out mercilessly for it, I actually don't disagree. And this gets back to our company versus industry approach. So for renewable energy, from what we currently have, we are looking at a minimum 8-fold increase in wind and solar just to service the known demand, let alone additional demand such as, a hydrogen industry, population growth outside what's expected, etc. And I think the other key thing with renewables is it's being driven. Like, this isn't a let's offer up some incentives and just see what companies come along and build out over time. Like, the government is actively driving through legislation the development of a renewable energy industry through both emissions reduction targets and renewable energy targets in the Queensland Energy Jobs Plan. So you have a legislated driver that is making this industry occur quickly. And once again, it will primarily occur on land in regional Queensland that's being occupied and used for other purposes. And that's a key thing for us to understand. I think we're seeing now, and like Wendy said at the start, and as we've all seen, we're seeing the beginning of some of the errors, if you like, or some of the learnings we should have realised from CSG now merge in renewables. So there is definitely a decrease in social license, and we can spend hours talking about what social license actually is. But let's say a decrease in trust and community acceptance to what should be there and what is necessary for it to occur. I think as a whole, the renewable energy industry rode a wave for a while, as it's very hard to argue with the concept of generating power from wind and solar. But when the rubber hits the road, it's a large construction project as well. And it will occur in regional Queensland and involve industrialisation of a landscape that wasn't previously industrialised in many areas. And that needs to be considered. The key issues are very similar. Inconsistent engagement with various skills of practitioners is a kicker. Staff turnover, the ability or the level of decision-making which is pushed out to regional staff and entities, and the level of knowledge that those people are provided. One of the key things, I think, and a recommendation from me for the industry, I think, and I might be biased in this regard because I've been there, but I actually think that the coal seam gas companies underinvested in their land access and engagement personnel. Like, you're actually probably looking at one of the jobs that needs to be some of the most skilled in a company. Like, you can't be a specialist engineer. You can't be a specialist geotech. You don't want someone who's just a really good bloke who can talk to people. Like, you actually, for those roles to be done properly, you need someone who understands rural and regional Queensland, understands communities. They need to be technically savvy enough that they actually understand what it is that's being built and how it's going to be built, and have a level of knowledge that they can actually impart in that regard. Then they, on top of that, they actually need to be able to engage, be understood, empathise, read people, and participate in that way. And to get those people who can do all of those things is hard. Now, you won't buy them off trees or find them on the ground. You'll get some people with various skills. But I think one of the learnings is that the renewable energy industry needs to invest in those people once they have them, with skills and training and upgrades in that space. It is really, really important that the people we send out and have into communities to engage with landholders and others actually know what they're talking about and are credible and have some authority in that regard. Now, that doesn't happen overnight, and that will be a key thing for the industry to nail. Competing land use, the trailing regulation, the lack of science to some of the questions we've currently got at the moment, and the lack of clarity and certainty about where we're going. Some things are definitely in the favour of the renewable energy industry. A key one, very much so, is that they have no right to be on a property. Like, you actually need the landholder's permission to be there, because the landholder can say no. And that's embedded into law. And that is a key difference. It's subtle and it's often misunderstood, but it is a key difference, because you actually need to make the landholder happy before they'll say yes. But I actually think there's a number of things that renewable energy industry will find more challenging than the resources sector did. And these are the things that need to be considered. So I think one is the resource sector has tenure. So, a company is given an area of land in which they're allowed to prospect and develop. And if you're within that area, you know exactly who the company is, who you'll be dealing with in that space. That doesn't happen with renewables. There is no tenure. Renewables are negotiated on a property by property basis. You could have multiple companies operating in the same area, and you can have multiple companies approaching the same landholder. There's also no guarantee as to whether any of or all of the projects will go ahead, or whether they'll be on-sold, or which ones are companies that are actually trying to drum up some business to sell agreements to a larger company later on, etc. Like, there's a lot more players in the space with a lot less clarity around the progression of projects, the validity of the company that you're dealing with, and who it is that you actually should be talking to in that space.
So,
I actually think sorry, Wendy, you're right.
I was going to say, you must have read the minds of some of the audience, because some questions have just come through about tenure.
Right. Well, if we give me 2 minutes, I'll finish this off and we'll tackle the questions.
Awesome. And there's one more question then, and we'll move.
Right.
Yes, so you finish up, and then we've got one more question for you.
No worries. So look, the other ones, the increased uncertainty, so the what and the where it'll be. These projects can be more visible or impact more land than resources. Wind is visible from a long way away. Solar takes out a lot of land. These are increased factors in terms of competing land use. I think as an industry, it is not as labour or service industry dependent during its operational phase. So you won't see the same ongoing number of people or regional benefit that you would with the resources industry. And quite simply, it's not as profitable. So the checkbooks aren't as large in the front stages as well. So I think for me, the key things, don't underestimate the value of communities and the need to engage and communicate and strategize with communities and entities at a coordinated level amongst proponents. I don't think the industry should fear additional regulation. Until the additional regulation is in place, people will fear the industry. Like, there needs to be enough regulation that people are confident that things will be managed. And so I actually think industry should be actively involved in welcoming or even designing some of that regulation and step forward on that. We do need some science, and I actually think we need to sort out how to leave a legacy benefit from the renewable energy industry, particularly given the size of the players and the different profitability scope. So how do we coordinate and communicate that externally? That's probably it for me then, Wendy, in terms of a rough run through. I'll stop sharing the screen. There we go. And you're going to run the questions, Wendy? How do we work this?
Oh, yeah. So I was sitting here chatting away on mute. You'd think it was 2020. I loved your presentation. I especially loved your pictures, but I think half the audience are probably too young and they'll have to Google it later.
So they should, for their own development, I reckon.
So can I just say, I was listening to that going, has anything changed? I've written notes and gone, oh my Lord. Okay, we have time for one quick answer, Andrew Bryce. I know you know so much and could talk forever. Chris Saunis has said, how can state and national plans around workforce assist community who need place-based plans, and how do we get place-based plans that are developed collaboratively?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I guess what I see is a lot of things that are steps in the right direction, and the state-based workforce plans, etc., are that, and you can translate them to local. I actually think the bigger issue there is the question I would ask is what actually drives that local workforce development? And do you want to be driving that simultaneously across the entire state or across multiple areas, or do you want to phase development in such a way that it's actually sustainable as well? For me, I'd love to see the government take a proactive approach to the renewable energy zones, particularly in relation to how the works are phased and staged. And then that would inform the local workforce plan from my perspective.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate your wisdom and your slides. They're excellent, and it's a wonderful way to kick off. We're going to power on, pardon the pun, to our expert panel who are waiting in the wings, ready and raring to go. Please keep your questions coming. If we can't answer them online, which we probably won't be able to because we will run out of time today, I'm happy to farm them out to our speakers, and we can pop them in the email that I send out after the session. So thank you so much, Rob, Kathy, and Fraser, for volunteering to be on here. I really appreciate volunteerism. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the paddock, introduce you, get you to give, I'll give you a couple of questions, and we'll come back together for questions from the audience. So we might start with you, Rob Fraser. So Rob's here with a couple of hats on today. He's a proud chinchilla business owner and community member. He's a farmer with CSG wells on his property. He's currently the principal of Ray White Rural in Chinchilla, although for many years he was head valuer at Fraser's Valuers. So he's bringing extensive experience as a valuer with both CSG and renewables impacted properties. Thank you for joining us today, Rob.
Thanks,
Now,
Wendy.
what was it like for you and your family and your community more broadly to live through the CSG boom in Chinchilla?
Well, Wendy, thank you, and Andrew, such a great presentation. Thank you. The to be in the middle of this this development was something no one had ever seen before, and I, as a young valuer at that stage, I was just coming through, and I'd been on the farm all my life, and to see this and the feverish pitch of development within the area and people trying to make money and get in and go hard at it was unbelievable. So I'll start off back at the start, as where, you know, as a valuer with my valuer's cap on, we the housing development, the industrial development, and the development in the townships was phenomenal. And what was happening there is that with all this, like Andrew was saying, the three proponents coming in and doing this massive development all at once, and a sort of race to get up to Gladstone, the the employment opportunities and the workforce within the area was phenomenal. So as to house the employees and the workforce, obviously the housing developments were required. A lot of land was set for houses, and for on a valuing on, I'm only a small valuing firm there, and the amount of as if complete or valuations required that people were coming in and investing their superannuation fund money, their own personal savings, going in and doing that was phenomenal. And it was good because it had to went in and did it and thought it was a good thing. And the returns, 6, 7, 8% return on investment. It was amazing. And we're seeing old houses in Miles, for instance, turning in from a 3-bedroom house, turning into a 6-bedroom, 6-bathroom dormitory, as to say, and getting $3,000 a week rent. And it was, and people were showing the smarts about that, and it had to be done. So in the development, there was no houses. We saw builders come out and live in tents until they got the roof over the house. It was an amazing thing. So we sort of got through that stage there where we're sort of housing our people and the industrial development in. And I'll go back to Andrew's commentary there about the camps, and it's a very totally understand where in the building stage or the development stage, and where it's only going to be 2 or 3 years. Well, that's a great thing for the camps because the towns can't handle it. But when it comes to the maintenance stage and the people coming in and staying there for 5 or 10 years, well, that's when they should be in the town. That's just my little point there. But then we go into the housing development. That's all done. We've got the industrial development camps. People have their different opinion about that and what goes on there. But the big one was that at the end, when it all finished, and we'll go back in there during the processes, the forces, the companies were showing social governance by investing into the town. So that was huge. Like the Chinchilla back in 2008, 2010 was just a smoke little town, all country, the services provided for agriculture predominantly. Then we move into the CSG, and then the people were gearing up and to be able to provide services for the CSG industry. And the big thing was to provide for local. So that was a good initiative. But then we wound down and to work out what local is, and that was Australia. So we're getting companies coming in from Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and doing stuff in Chinchilla where we could have done something if someone had to set us up properly and given us a scope where we could have done that and set businesses up and kept things in the local town instead of Brisbane. So we see that, or further afield. So and a perfect example was with me and as a valuer. So I do a lot of compensatory work for some of the proponents, but one of the proponents was went on the spiel, and I was only local valuer. I lived here at Chinchilla, and they were utilising outside valuers in Brisbane and Toowoomba, and I went on the rampage and said, "Why aren't you using me?" And then we got onto the panel, and it was all good. And then they did a big media spiel about utilising local. Got one valuation out of it, and it was just they decided to go elsewhere. So that's just, my big point is use local. There's local. You need to have local people and utilise the people that are in the towns.
So that's a great point, Rob. Well, that's a great point, and I'm really aware you and I could talk all day. So you've just given us some really good points. What would be the 2 or 3 things really succinctly that you would say to everyone on this call you'd expect as a developer coming into town? I heard you just talk about buy local, spend local, use the local content.
Yep. But
think about the impact. What would be 2 other things that you think are really important when people come into town?
I think they need to have the scope, the time that they're going to be there. So the CSG industry, going back on what Andrew was saying there, we had this massive ramp off and then ramp up, and then we fell off the end of the cliff. So these investors have come in there, spent all their money, and broke in the next 12 months because the rents were $1,000, $800 a week, going back to 150 if you could get it. So we've got this. So no one knew that. I had people trying to sue me because of a valuer, because not foreseeing what was happening, and no one gave us the reason, no one gave us an end date. So if you want investment in these towns and doing what you want to do, we need to have open, transparent relationships saying, yes, we're going to build now. This is a development stage, this is a maintenance stage, and this will be a wind down stage. So, and so the investors can go in and go, yep, rightio, this is what I expect. So that's my big takeaway about it, is being open and transparent between the industry and the community.
Thank you so much, Rob. And we could talk all day, but I'm really aware that we've got other guest speakers here who we need to hear from as well. And there might be some questions for you at the end. Thank you so much, Rob.
No worries. Thanks, Wendy.
You next, Kathy. So everyone, let me introduce you to Associate Professor Kathy Witt. She leads the Community and Coexistence Research Stream at the University of Queensland's Gas and Energy Transition Research Centre. She has degrees in environmental management and sociology. More importantly, she's been studying for the last decade, but it's actually nearly 11 years, the cumulative social and economic effects of coal seam gas development in the Surat Basin. And I heard her speak in Miles a couple of months ago, and I was really struck by her passion for communities, thriving rural communities, with coexistence with development. And I thought I absolutely had to have her on here and learn some more about her research. So Kathy, welcome.
Thanks, Wendy.
Could you give us a bit of a cook's tour of your research into over the last decade around the impacts of coal seam gas?
Yeah, sure. Yes, well, we've been in the regions. I love getting out into the regions and talking to people. So I guess over 10 years, there's been a lot of research. 3 of my projects probably stand out in terms of relevance for this talk today. One is the 10 years of cumulative effects assessment, where we have collected timelines of 20 years plus of social and economic, health, crime data at town level for towns across the Surat Basin and up into the Bowen, and also some control towns elsewhere. But not just the data collection on that. What's really important is to have that data and the trends in the data validated and explained, sort of matched, or ground truth, as we call it, through interviews and regular check-ins with people in the community. And they tell us what it's like when the rents go up, what other things happen. So getting that real systems understanding of what happens in these communities, and being able to have a look across each town, because what of the main finding is that we've found that each town has responded differently. It's been affected differently. So we often talk about the Surat Basin as a single, or the Maranoa area, or the Western Downs. But when you look down at town level, each town has been able to either capture or miss out on benefits according to their size, their proximity, their past experiences, and the structure and function of the communities themselves.
So with your insights from your research, what does it mean for those who are engaging in the regions during this energy transition? What would be your transferable takeaways for the audience today?
Yeah, so there's a lot, and I've just finished I'm just finishing off some research looking exactly at this in terms of taking the lessons learned from the coal seam gas into renewables. So look out for that. But I think I'd like to pick up on a couple of things that Andrew mentioned, because there's so much detail in there, but that idea of engaging early and not being afraid of uncertainty. So when you're engaging in that it's not quite clear what the project is going to look at, you might not have all the details 100% accurate, but being honest and upfront about that, sort of not shying away from the fact that there might be risks associated, that people might be concerned. So engaging honestly and upfront and acknowledging uncertainty, saying, you know what, this is our best estimate at what it's going to look like. Things might change. So I think that is an important one. Also for building trust. And so many times people have said to us, we just need to know, as Rob just said then, if we hadn't known this beforehand, we could have responded perhaps differently. The other thing is, and the other thing that Andrew mentioned is the pace. And we know that the pure pace of the development, how quickly it happened, that the towns were not ready, the infrastructure wasn't there, the knowledge and the awareness and the understanding wasn't there. Some of those systems so businesses to be able to put in their contracts and get their skills and accreditations, it wasn't there, we weren't ready. So there were some of those cumulative impacts that did happen with CSG that perhaps could have been managed better through managing the pace. And the other big one, I think, that both Rob and Andrew have mentioned is that coordinated piece. So one thing is, really trying to coordinate across the projects. So each project had its social impact assessment. They had all their impact assessments, but nobody could quite capture that, the greater than the sum of the parts types of impacts and the coordination that's required around that to manage them effectively.
So for the individuals listening, there's some things there they don't have any influence over, like the pace. And Andrew has said it's it's legislated. The drivers are legislated for this for the renewables, and the coordination. Everyone is bringing that up. But there's certainly things there that each individual can consider. I guess if I asked you one more question. With that building trust, what have you found?
Well, we have measured trust over time. Our surveys on trust have shown that actually trust in the CSG companies has increased over time, which is another observation of Andrew's and Rob's. So it was a low base, given it was a very low base in the beginning, but it has increased over time. And I think that is just as those relationships develop, I think it is a combination of perhaps the fear lessening with familiarity of the industry, and that some of those fears haven't eventuated perhaps, or the sense that things are just playing out, and some of those fears just have not eventuated. But that relationship building, I think it really comes down to just on the ground, having people in the towns, those points of contact. The shop fronts have been very effective as places where people can go and ask questions and raise concerns and have them addressed.
So what I've heard from you there, that some of the key components that you've measured to build trust are around that being honest. Don't be afraid of the uncertainty. Make sure you address people's questions, be on the ground, have that point of contact, build relationships over time. And you've also observed that experience is disproving fear. So as time goes along, when their fears haven't materialized, that has helped with trust too, which is interesting. So thank you so much, Kathy. I'm going to now introduce Fraser, who's patiently waiting. So
hey, everyone.
Hello there, Fraser. Everyone, please meet Fraser. He is the head of advocacy within the Construction and Development Division of Generation for Origin Energy. He's worked with Origin since the heady days of CSG in 2012, and he's a specialist in the field of external affairs and stakeholder engagement, advocacy and relationship management. So he's sure got a run in coal seam gas there for a while. So he's worked across energy, not-for-profit and transport sectors. He's passionate about building deep relationships that support shared benefits, positive outcomes, and enhanced corporate reputation for the key stakeholder groups. Welcome, Fraser.
Thanks so much, Wendy.
What have you got to share about what you learned in the coal seam gas period, and what's the lesson for us now?
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the panel. Very hard to come last after such distinguished speakers, and indeed all the people on the call. So I'll just try and summarize, probably from a practitioner perspective, working for a company, because I think that could perhaps be useful as well. Look, I've thought about this a lot and agree with everything said today, but also in terms of the actual engagement, you go back to what is important and what have I learnt? It's around how you do it. So I'd probably start, one thing I've been thinking about a lot, connect before consulting. So, we're all work for big organizations and we go into the consultation mode. Oh, we've got to consult and tell people what we're doing. But let's connect first and get that connection with the local community. And look, my views on that is that you try to build these meaningful long-term relationships. Now, nothing in this is rocket science, but it is very important. And, from my perspective, what are the keys to those long-term relationships? Trust, authenticity, and delivery. I do believe people actually need to feel safe that you have their interests at heart. And I've used that word safe because they come to us. We're coming into the area with big infrastructure projects. So they actually do need to feel safe that they can talk to you and discuss issues. So trust first, ongoing meaningful connection, which is the authenticity and authentic engagement and delivery of outcomes. I guess we all know that if we say we're going to do something, that we follow up. And another aspect that I've learned, Wendy, is to be visible in a meaningful way. Again, don't just turn up to the formal consultations and engagements. Try and be there at times that are important to those in the community, even if you have to dress up as a cow, which I have done. And I say that because that's all the fabric of the local community. Be there a bit more than just the formal times that work for the company. The informal connections and shared experience are valuable, and build up knowledge of the fabric of regional communities. Another one I've learned and still learning is keep your assumptions in check. Do we actually know what people think and want? I then would acknowledge Kathy's work. Research is something I think is critical to factor into your engagement and your planning so that you actually begin to understand what do people actually think. And just be careful with assumptions. Can affect community investment. Origin developed a program where the Queensland Symphony Orchestra goes out to the Surat Basin and goes into the schools and teaches music and community concerts. When we first developed it, people said, "Oh, no one likes classical music out there." Well, indeed, it's been a very successful program delivering education to kids in remote areas. So just those assumptions, be careful about. I'd probably go back to what Andrew and Kathy's alluded to around cooperation where commercially possible. I think that's an interesting, big issue in the renewable kind of transition. There's a lot of companies, and so there's a lot of consultation fatigue, cumulative social impacts. I think there are some commercial drivers at times which can impede that, but I do think, can we cooperate more to deliver outcomes for community investment and deliver value? And probably the last one, understand context around people's lives. I think our projects are not the only thing in their life. They're dealing with many other things, cost of living, possibly drought, health issues. So I think more and more take that bigger picture, that your engagement is one subset of what they do. And have you considered that they are dealing with many other issues and how your engagement fits into that?
Wow. Okay, Fraser, there's the power 5 minutes of the power hour. I don't know how everyone else is going, but I'm trying to get those notes down. And what I love about today's session is you've all woven Rob build on Andrew, Kathy on Rob and Andrew, and then you've pulled it home, Fraser, with the how do we apply that research, that community knowledge that that Rob's got from being there, and Andrew's experience as a coal seam gas executive during and engineer during those years. And I've written so many notes, and I guess my summary would be that your job is to connect before you consult. So build meaningful long-term relationships. It's about trust, authenticity, and then doing what you say you're going to do. Be visible in a meaningful way. Be like Fraser, dress up as a cow. If that's what it takes. Be there. I really like that though. Be there beyond the formal connection and build knowledge of that community's fabric. One of the things Kathy said is that each community will have a different experience of what is happening. So learn that. Keep your assumptions in check. Read the research. understand the context in people's lives, that you are not the most important thing to them potentially, and cooperation where it's commercially possible would be utopia because of the consultation fatigue, and the commercial tug and war of that is a bit tricky, but we could deliver much more value if we worked collaboratively. So that's my cook's tour of what you said, Fraser. That was such a fabulous way to pull it all together. We have got lots of questions and we are out of time. So I'm going to finish up, but what I am going to do is with these questions, we will send them to our speakers and get them to write some answers that can, they're going to be delighted for this. They volunteered for an hour and now I'm giving them homework. Sorry, people, but we love the knowledge you've brought. Your cumulative knowledge is too much to allow to escape. So people have left questions. I'll get some answers for you. Thank you so much, panel. You've been fabulous. I am going to ask Andrew to jump back on, please, because I've got one last question, if I can organise myself here.
And I'm going to apologise for making everyone late. I didn't realise I ratted it on as long as I did. So
I was very polite too, wasn't I, Andrew?
you were.
There's something strange happens every day. So all of you, this is a 1 dot point answer. What's the one key takeaway that you want people to leave today with? So when they go back into their office, they say, you need to watch that power hour because I took away these 4 key points. I'm going to start with you, Andrew, because you've had a bit of a break. What's the one key takeaway?
Don't underestimate the competitive and social advantage in investing heavily in your engagement personnel. Train them, invest in them, get the right ones and get the right people and empower them to do the job.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, Fraser, you're a perfect segue. What do you say? What's your one key takeaway for everyone?
Just really build that connection, work hard, even if there's differences of opinion, don't let it get you down, keep working and do everything you can to understand those communities and make them feel that you're someone who will listen to them, whatever issue they have in relation to your project.
Wow. That's 3 dot points in one, but it's so good. Okay. All right, Rob, what about you? What's your one key takeaway for everyone?
Use local. We have the people out here. We have the young people here. We want the young people to stay in town, and they are all advantageous and want to go ahead. So please look after your local people first.
Beautiful. Thanks, Rob. Kathy, you get the last word. Go
Terrific.
for it.
Think big. How does your engagement fit in with everything else that's happening in people's lives? How can your project align with sustainable regional development aspirations? That's it. Think big. Think bigger than yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Oh gosh, so much wisdom, so much knowledge shared, and lots of questions that I'm sending you for homework. So thank you. Now, before we all head off, I do want to call on Hannah Gardner from Queensland Renewable Energy Council to give a quick final word from them as one of our supporters for this series. Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Wendy. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, perfectly.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thanks, Andrew. I now have the YMCA song stuck in my head. So, yeah, it's going to be in there for a while. Really, really interesting discussion. And yes, a lot of similarities. I liked the comment about how CSG development came hard and fast. And I think we're seeing the same thing. The impacts and actions of one company, which reflects on the entire industry, it's so important to earn that trust. And our Coordinator General said last week, it takes so long to build up and it can be lost in an instant. So QREC, as part of the work we're doing, we're committed to lifting up that standard in terms of community consultation and engagement. And Wendy's doing amazing things as well with her community engagement training from the regional perspective. So loving what we were talking about today about, early transparency, thinking local opportunities in procurement as well, being honest and upfront about your project and just acknowledging that uncertainty. Access to information, we know that people want to know more about the projects before they make a decision, and commercially beneficial for all the proponents looking to to construct something in the region. And Fraser, I really loved your comment about connecting before consulting, which I got a bit confused first. I thought you meant connection to the grid, but no, connecting and building the relationship before consulting. And again, I agree that the informal consultation is just as important as the formal consultation. Thank you everyone for your time today. And thank you, Wendy. Thank you to the panelists. We really appreciate the support.
Thanks, Hannah, for that lovely wrap up. Everyone, we're so grateful you could join us. The recording will be sent out. And inspired by these forums, actually in conjunction with Energy Charter, we've started a podcast. So I can't leave without telling you it's awesome. Well, at least I hope you find it valuable, because that's the intent. It's a way of giving forward. The podcast is called Empower. So search Empower Energy Transition on your favorite platform. The first episode was with Andrew Dyer, getting his insights on the Dyer report. And the second episode drops next week. So it'd be awesome for you to jump on board, and each fortnight you can get some bite-sized learning, a sprinkle of inspiration, and some practical tips. So that's my upsell for that. Hopefully you find it heaps of value, and we want your feedback so you can guide it. Our next virtual forum is Understanding First Nations Engagement, and is shaping up to be a cracker. On Friday, the 11th of October at 9:30, we will get the information out to you. Thank you again, Andrew, Rob, Kathy, and Fraser. And a giant thank you to someone no one of you would have seen, Sarah from the Energy Charter, who's in the background, being my technical magician, making sure all of this happens. So thank you, everyone. Have a safe, enjoyable afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you again in a month. See you later.
Bye.